Moving on to the financial provisions, state guarantees and international financial institution funds bill 2023, second stage. And the Minister, please.
Bill be now read a second time. And I welcome the opportunity to address Dáil today on the Finance State Guarantees, International Financial Institution Funds and Miscellaneous Provisions Bill 2023, which was published on Monday, 18th of September 2023. At the outset, it is important to remind ourselves that Ireland is entirely supportive of the European Union and its financial institutions playing an important role in the resilience and recovery of Ukraine, in line with successive European Council conclusions. In order to follow through with this stance, Ireland is seeking to contribute to instruments of financial support through the European Union and international financial institutions that are working to ensure the resilience and, when the time comes, the reconstruction of Ukraine in light of the illegal and aggressive Russian invasion. The Finance State Guarantees International Financial Institution Funds and Miscellaneous Provision Bills 2023 is intended to facilitate participation by the state in these efforts to help Ukraine by facilitating participation in certain donor or trust funds established by certain European-based international financial institutions. The bill also provides for Oireachtas approval to enter into guarantee and contribution agreements associated with European financial assistance to Ukraine, while providing a basis for any payments required to meet commitments under the agreement from the Central Fund, and to make provision for reporting to Dáil to facilitate parliamentary oversight of the operation of the guarantee and contribution agreements. Under its miscellaneous provisions, the bill also seeks to amend Section 38(1) of the Criminal Justice, Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act 2010, so as to require those engaging in correspondent banking relationships to conduct enhanced due diligence when the respondent is within the EU and not just when outside, as is currently the case. Before I detail the relevant sections, it's worthwhile noting the policy context behind this very important and very timely bill. Since the outbreak of war in Ukraine resulting from Russia's illegal invasion in February last year, the European Commission has proposed and implemented a number of macro-financial assistance, also known as MFA programmes, to help with Ukraine's immediate financing needs. MFAs are a well-established form of financial aid extended by the EU to countries experiencing a balance of payments crisis, and takes the form of loans and/or grants. MFA programmes are typically provisioned by the Common Provisioning Fund of the EU budget at a rate of 9% of the value of the loans. However, due to the unusually high level of MFA activity since the invasion of Ukraine, the Common Provisioning Fund in the current EU budget has been virtually depleted. This, coupled with the relatively elevated risk of potential non-repayment of MFA loans by Ukraine, has led the EU to adopt a bespoke approach to the guarantees for the final €6 billion in loans disbursed during the second half of 2022 to that country, whereby the provisioning for the loans is at a higher rate of 70% split between the Common Provisioning Fund 9% and Member State guarantees 61%. The EU has also proposed to cover the interest rate costs in relation to the 2023 MFA loans to the extent possible by the EU budget, and where the funds available in the budget are insufficient, directly by the Member States. In this regard, the relevant EU regulation provides for an interest rate subsidy to be paid by contributions from Member States, the terms of which are set out in contribution agreements between the European Union and the Member States. In April 2023, the Government gave its approval for the Minister for Finance, acting on behalf of the State, to enter into guarantee and contribution agreements in relation to EU macro-financial assistance operations to Ukraine for both the previous and current years, i.e. 2022 and 2023, subject to the enactment of this legislation. The importance of EU macro-financial assistance to Ukraine cannot be overstated. It is playing a key role in helping the Ukrainian government to maintain a basic level of state services to its citizens in the most difficult and traumatic circumstances. It is vitally important that Ireland participates fully in this initiative, which demonstrates clearly the solidarity of the EU with the people of Ukraine. Ireland recognises the scale of the challenges faced by Ukraine in both the short and the long term. Any effect felt by our own economy from the Russian invasion most certainly pales in comparison to the humanitarian and economic impact of the war in Ukraine, and sadly that position continues as we meet here today. Ireland supports the EU's united response to the war in Ukraine, which forms an important part of what is a strong and consistent global response to a global challenge to democracy and human rights. This support is perhaps best demonstrated by the agreement and implementation of the MFA packages, which has seen €20.7 billion successfully disbursed since the Russian invasion in February 2022, with a further €4.5 billion expected to be disbursed over the remainder of 2023. Our support for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity is unwavering. It is important that this legislation is swiftly enacted so that the state can fulfil its commitments at EU level in relation to financial supports to Ukraine. Ireland cannot fully participate in the EU's macro-financial assistance initiatives for Ukraine for both 2022 and 2023 unless this legislation is enacted. In addition, European international financial institutions, IFIs, have played a key role in supporting Ukraine since the outset of the war in February 2022. As deputies will already know, Ireland is a shareholding member of the European Investment Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development and the Council of Europe Development Bank. All three of those institutions play important roles in relation to responding to international events that require a rapid multilateral response. In this regard, they all played their part in responding to the global pandemic and its impact in their respective countries of operation. They are now also responding decisively in line with their mandates to provide financial assistance to Ukraine and countries impacted by the Russian invasion in relation to liquidity to businesses, food security, nuclear safety and the displacement of refugees. This has mostly been done through existing levels of capital in each of the banks. However, to facilitate the additional investment required via direct donations from shareholders and the international community, the banks are using trust and donor funds rather than their existing capital. It is proposed that this bill, when enacted, would provide the legal basis to facilitate Ireland's entry into contribution agreements with the EIB, CEDB and the EBRD to make contributions to trust and donor funds from the Central Fund. This will facilitate Ireland's timely participation in international responses by these IFIs to the current crisis in Ukraine and any other future crisis without the need to introduce primary legislation each time that can lead to time delays. Excuse me. It is important to note that the bill provides a legislative basis for Ireland to contribute to the response of these three IFIs to an international crisis, and as such it enhances our range of policy interventions in such cases. I now propose to give an overview of the operation of the bill, which is 22 sections and is divided into 7 parts as follows. Part 1, the first 2 sections are standard legislative sections and provide for the short title and citation of the Act and relevant definitions. Parts 2, 3 and 4 are the contributions to IFI trust funds, and they enable the state to participate in certain donor or trust funds established by the European Investment Bank, the Council of Europe Development Bank or the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and those parts include sections 3 to section 11. Part 2, the prescribed European Investment Bank contribution agreements. Section 3 specifically provides that the Minister may by order prescribe a contribution agreement between the state and the European Investment Bank that relates to a trust fund established by the EIB. Where amendments are proposed to a prescribed contribution agreement with the EIB, they shall be approved by a resolution of Dáil and published in Iris Ifigul. Payments in respect of a prescribed contribution agreement with the EIB to be made from the Central Fund and not exceed €35 million for a single prescribed EIB contribution agreement or €175 million in respect of all EIB contribution agreements. Reporting requirements are set out and reports are to be laid before Dáil. So just let me correct, is that correct? Part 3, Amendment of European Bank for Reconstruction and Development Act 1991. Section 4 clarifies the Act of 1991 means European Bank for Reconstruction and Development Act 1991. Section 5 amends the definition of the agreement set out in Section 1 of the Act of 1991 to incorporate amendments to the agreement establishing the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development adopted on the 30th of January 2004 and the 30th of September 2011 and any further amendments approved by Dáil. Section 6 provides that the Minister may by order prescribe a contribution agreement between the State and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development that relates to a trust fund established by the EBRD where the terms of the contribution agreement have been approved by Dáil pursuant to Article 29(5)(2) of the Constitution. Where amendments are proposed to a prescribed contribution agreement with the EBRD, they will require approval by a resolution of Dáil pursuant to Article 29(5)(2) of the Constitution and be published in Iris Ifigul. Payments in respect of a prescribed contribution agreement with the EBRD are to be made from the Central Fund and not exceed €10 million for a single prescribed EBRD contribution agreement or €100 million in respect of all prescribed EBRD contribution agreements. Reporting requirements are set out and reports are to be laid before Dáil. Section 7 provides that the schedule of the 1991 Act be substituted with Schedule 1 of this Act, the text of the agreement establishing the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development as amended, and Schedule 1 includes the current wording of the agreement. Part 4 is the amendment of Council of Europe Development Bank Act 2004. Section 8 clarifies that the Act of 2004 means the Council of Europe Development Bank Act 2004. Section 9 amends the definition of the agreement set out in Section 1 of the Act of 2004 to incorporate amendments to the Articles of Agreement establishing the Council of Europe Development Bank adopted on 26th of November 2010 and 25th of November 2011, and any further amendments approved by Dáil. Section 10 amends the Act of 2004 by inserting a new Section 3A that provides that the Minister may by order prescribe a contribution agreement between the State and the Council of Europe Development Bank that relates to a trust fund established by the CEDB, where the terms of the contribution agreement have been approved by Dáil pursuant to Article 29(5)(2) of the Constitution. Where amendments are proposed to a prescribed contribution agreement with the CEDB, they will require approval by a resolution of Dáil pursuant to Article 29(5)(2) of the Constitution and published in Iarsafigal. Payments in respect of a prescribed contribution agreement with the CEDB are to be made from the Central Fund and not exceed €10 million for a single prescribed CEDB contribution agreement, or €100 million in respect of all prescribed CEDB contribution agreements. Reporting requirements are set out and reports are to be laid before Dáil. Section 11 provides that the schedule of the 2004 Act be substituted with Schedule 2 of this Act, the text of the Articles of Agreement establishing the Council of Europe Development Bank as amended. Schedule 2 therefore includes the current wording of the agreement. Parts 5 and 6 are MFA assistance to Ukraine, and those parts of the bill enable the State to participate in the provision of exceptional macro-financial assistance by the European Union to Ukraine. Part 5 specifically is the Guarantee Agreement. Section 12 clarifies references to the Term Guarantee Agreement in Part 3 of the Bill. Section 13 provides that the Guarantee Agreement may be entered into by the Minister for Finance on behalf of the State. This enables the Minister, acting on behalf of the State, to execute and enter into the Ukraine MFA Guarantee Agreement and provides the Minister with the powers to meet the State's obligations underneath the agreement. The Guarantee Agreement relates to the second tranche of exceptional MFA to Ukraine, which is provisioned by a combination of Member State guarantees and the EU budget. Section 14 provides for the making of payments of up to €76,938,998 out of the Exchequer Central Fund, as may be required, to enable the State fulfil its commitments under the Guarantee Agreement. This facilitates the payment of contingent liabilities which would arise if Ukraine defaults on loans from the second tranche of exceptional MFA, resulting in Member State guarantees being called. Section 15 provides that any amounts returned to the State under the Guarantee Agreement will be paid into the Exchequer Central Fund. This clarifies that any monies refunded to the State under the MFA Guarantee Agreement are paid into the Central Fund. Section 16 provides for reporting to Dáil in relation to payments to and from the Exchequer Central Fund in relation to the Guarantee Agreement. In the event that a guarantee is called upon, a sum of money will leave the Irish Exchequer. The purpose of this provision is to ensure that there is parliamentary transparency regarding demands on the Member State guarantee. Part 6 is the MFA Plus Contribution Agreement. Part 6 clarifies and provides for the entry into the MFA Plus Contribution Agreement by the Minister for Finance on behalf of the State, and for the making of payments out of the Central Fund which may be required to enable the State fulfil its commitments under the MFA Plus Contribution Agreement. Section 17 clarifies references to the term MFA Plus Contribution Agreement in Part 3 of the Bill. Section 18 provides for the entry into the MFA Plus Contribution Agreement by the Minister for Finance on behalf of the State. This enables the Minister acting on behalf of the State to execute and enter into the MFA Plus Contribution Agreement and provides the Minister with the powers to meet the State's obligations under the agreement. The purpose of the MFA Plus regulation is to provide a basis in EU law to enable the Union to provide up to €18 billion to Ukraine in budgetary support in 2023 in the form of concessional loans. As part of the concessional terms of the loans, the EU member states have agreed that the interest costs of the loan will be covered to the extent possible by the EU budget, and where the funds available in the budget are insufficient, directly by member states. In this regard, the regulation provides for an interest rate subsidy to be paid by member state contributions, the terms of which are set out in the contribution agreement between the European Union and the member states. Section 19 provides for the making of payments out of the Exchequer Central Fund of up to €63,625,172, which may be required to enable the State fulfil its commitments under the MFA Plus Contribution Agreement. Section 20 provides that any amounts returned to the State under the MFA Plus Contribution Agreement will be paid into the Exchequer Central Fund. Section 21 provides for reporting to Dáil in relation to payments to and from the Exchequer Central Fund in relation to the MFA Plus contribution agreement. The Minister shall lay before Dáil an annual report detailing the amount of funds that have been paid out of the Central Fund for the purpose of the MFA Plus contribution agreement during each reporting period, and in total from the commencement of this legislation until the end of each reporting period. Part 7 amends Section 38, subsection 1 of the Criminal Justice Money Laundering and Terrorist Financing Act 2010 by deleting the words "situated in a place other than a member state." The effect of this will be to require those engaged in correspondent banking relationships to conduct enhanced due diligence with respondent institutions within the EU as well as outside of it. This will address an issue in Ireland's framework for anti-money laundering and countering the financing of terrorism, which was identified by the Financial Action Task Force, the global standard setter in this area, and of course of which Ireland is a member. So the bill is extremely important in the context of how Ireland is seen to respond to the current Ukraine crisis, indeed how Ireland actually responds to the current Ukraine crisis, and indeed any other future crises where the EU financial assistance and IFIs play a role. I hope that we can move the legislation through both houses as quickly as possible, having regard to the need for scrutiny, and I do look forward to Deputy's contributions at this and future stages, and I do hope to be able to respond to them as best I can. Thank you.